Good morning. I am Brian Riches. I'm a developmental psychologist, and with that, I really appreciated the stories we heard earlier today. As a scientist, it's really interesting to see and hear about your life experiences, how you developed into the people you are, and that's really what I wanted to share today is about the psychology of heroes. What are some cool discoveries that we're making right now? So, I'll start off with a little interesting fact. So, with it, a question. How many of you are left-handed? How many know someone who's left-handed? So, interestingly, I found that about 10.6% of the world population is left-handed. Interestingly, though, heroes may be more common than the people who are left-handed. But we'll come back to that. I found this interesting fact in doing some other research, and that's the really neat thing about science. Sometimes you're asking one question and you find more than just that answer. So one of the questions that I had was, how can we measure heroism? A lot of the research in heroes up to this point has used exemplars. What an exemplar is essentially a person who's done a heroic act, someone that we recognize, that we've awarded maybe, someone that we know is a hero. So we ask them questions. How did you develop? What was your life like? Here, take this personality assessment. So we've learned a lot of good things about them. But it's always after the fact. We're asking them, think back to what you were like as a child. Think back to what your parents said. Who were your role models? And that can teach us a lot of things. But we can't catch these potential heroes before they act with this kind of method. Other things have been tried, like trying to use surveys of, say, courage rather than heroism, because there wasn't a measure of heroism. So you say, well, courage is kind of close, so let's use this measure of courage, see if it's related. So I wanted to make something better because organizations like HIP are trying to train heroes. So we need a tool to see, hey, does this actually change things? Do your programs actually work? Do they help people become more heroic? We also want to learn about these heroes before they act and see if we can help people become more heroic. So organizations like these might be able to use a tool like this. So let's talk really quickly with some really silly examples about scientific measurement tools and how we make a good one. So scientific tools have to be valid and they have to be reliable. So let's start with reliable. Reliable basically means consistent. So let's take a kind of silly example. Let's say you want to step on your bathroom scale. So you step on that scale, it says 120 pounds. You step off, or I step off, and then I step back on. I hope it might be a little lower, but then I see 180 pounds instead. So a jump of like 60 pounds. If your scale did that, you'd probably throw it away, right? It's not giving you a consistent result. It's not a very trustworthy tool. So that's what reliability is about. It's about getting a similar measure each time. So let's talk about validity. Validity goes to accuracy, truth. So let's use a really silly example here. Let's say I wanted to measure happiness. How happy are people? I could take a tape measure and measure people's smiles. That would be a tool, something related to happiness. It'd probably be pretty reliable too. Your biggest smile today is probably about the same size as your biggest smile tomorrow, right? So that's going to be a reliable measure, but is that actually getting at happiness? Well, of course not. That's absurd. So one thing we really use is scales, surveys. You might have seen something like this in school or in a personality assessment. For children, we often use images, say, how happy are you? So I wanted to make a tool like that for studying heroism. So I started with making up some different questions, and I really wanted to get at two pieces of heroism. So some things that make it different from things like courage or empathy or social responsibility. I wanted to make sure I was getting at the risk that heroes might take and the benefit to other people. So those were the two key pieces that I really wanted to make sure this tool was measuring, because a hero takes a risky action for the benefit of other people. So I made a bunch of questions. I made up 52, but I'm only going to show you 4 of them, because that's a lot of questions. So essentially, I would say, how likely are you to risk your physical safety to benefit others? Then they would rank 1 to 7. Not very likely to very likely. What about risking your job to reveal the unethical behavior of a supervisor? risking social consequences to help a stranger, and returning into a burning building to save a stranger. So each of these are trying to get at that risk and benefit to other people. But I needed to make sure that they weren't just reliable, I needed to make sure they were valid. I didn't want to just be measuring a smile, I wanted to actually be measuring heroism. So the first step to testing that is testing what's called face validity. Basically, does this look like it measures heroism? So I asked a bunch of heroism experts, scientists, practitioners who are practicing and doing heroism training, and I asked them, hey, how closely does this fit your definition of heroism? And so they said, this one does, this one doesn't. The ones that didn't, I just threw them away. So it got shorter than 52, which was nice. So then I really was like, well, I know heroism experts think this measures heroism. Now I need to ask more regular people, not people like me who do the research and have these complicated definitions. I need to make sure general people think that these are risky and beneficial situations. So I ask them questions like this. Take a look at one of these questions, and then tell me, how risky would this action be to you? They have a slider there, how beneficial, and then how realistic. Wanting to make sure that I get all of those things. So based on that, anything that was rated low, I just threw it away. So fewer items. And in the end, with all these analyses, I wanted to have questions that gave me a nice normal distribution. So if you've ever taken a statistics course, you've probably heard normal distribution. I'll point out kind of what this means really quickly. I wanted some people to score really high. Basically, a high score means you're pretty likely to do a heroic act. A very low score means you're very unlikely to do a heroic act. And there's a lot of people in the middle. It's really easy to use a tool that gives that kind of measure. Versus something like this. This is something we often see in science with a pro-social measure. You see there's a line on the far right there that says everybody says that they will do something pro-social. And that's hard. If you want to train people to be pro-social, but they already feel like they are going to be, you can't see a change. You can't go from a 10 to higher when the scale only goes to 10. So having something like this is much better. So I did a bunch of analyses. I compared heroism to moral courage. If you've ever heard the word correlation, this is what that actually looks like in a computer screen. So there's that dot in the top middle. That person scored really high on heroism, but only about halfway up the scale of moral courage. The people at the top right, they scored really high on moral courage and really high on heroism. The people at the bottom left scored really low on moral courage and really low on heroism. So basically what this means is these are related. And it should be. That's what I hypothesized, was that heroism would be related to moral courage because we expect heroes to be courageous. It was also related to empathy, which is feeling what other people are feeling and being able to take their perspective. It was related to social responsibility, which is essentially feeling a responsibility for humanity and the people around you. I didn't expect this one, that it would be this related to self-efficacy. I thought it would be kind of non-existent correlation, but there was still a correlation. So this is really good evidence. This suggests to me that I'm not just measuring a smile. This suggests to me that I probably am measuring heroism. But I wanted to do another test. I wanted to see how actual heroes do on this scale. So I gathered a bunch of people, and I thought, if I gather about 300 people, some of them will probably be heroes. So I asked them. And I compared the non-heroes to the heroes. I hypothesized that the heroes would get higher scores. And that's what I found. The heroes taking this scale did get higher scores. But even with this, about 300 people, only about 90 of those people were heroes. So I decided I needed a much bigger sample. And I also wanted to test it again. That's called replication. So I got a bunch of people, about 700, and I did it again, and I found the same result. So essentially what this shows is that this scale is measuring heroism. But why does that matter? Why am I presenting it here today? Why am I sharing this? This matters because now we can identify people who are likely to be heroes before the heroic act. We can follow them. We can do longitudinal studies. We can understand who they are before heroic action, not just by asking them questions after. We can model other relationships. We can see how it's related to other variables in psychology. Is it related to actual happiness? Or is heroism related to moral courage in ways that we didn't expect? And programs like HIP are going to be able to use this kind of tool to be able to see if their programs are working. And that's one of the biggest and neatest things about it. And with this, when we can measure change from people going from not very heroic intentions to middle to very high, we can measure that change now. So for people who come to an event like this, has it changed your intention to behave heroically? I hope so. Interestingly, I found all these cool new scientific discoveries in doing this research. I already mentioned that in the one study, there was about 13% of the people who were heroes. In that sample of 700, about 14% of them were heroes. So this is more than the people who are left-handed in the world. Heroism may be more common than being left-handed. About 8% of US adults own a motorcycle. Hopefully I'm in that group again soon. Heroes might be more common than US adults who own a motorcycle. About 8% of US white males have color blindness. Heroes might be more common than US white males with color blindness. There might be a lot more heroes around you than you even realize. Some of the stories that I heard from the heroes in this might ring true to you. People that risk to benefit other people. This one might ring true to you. It might be something that you might imagine actually encountering. So there's a lot more heroes around you than you probably realize. Generally, heroes don't admit that they're heroes. They generally don't like that label. But there's people around you, and you might even be in a situation where you might need to be heroic. So while I hope you don't ever find yourself in a situation that's so bad that it does require heroism, I hope that the people's stories today, I hope that the things that you've learned in your life do help you and encourage you to be a hero. And I'm glad to share these interesting pieces of research. If you have any questions for me, feel free to send me an email. You can download this presentation and some of these stats, and I'd love to share more with you later on, talking to you at the conference.